I'm not sponsored, but it is a booster juice kind of day. Back with another Next.js project. You can clearly tell that I have a favorite framework here. This is a super simple project that's pretty much all front end. There's no database, there's no API calls. It's pretty much just using Next.js and Tailwind to create a quiz game. I'll show you what it looks like. And this is it. It's a version of the higher lower game, but with baseball stats. So things like home runs, walks. You basically just have 3 wrong attempts, so 3 strikes, and try and get as high as you can. So you can see in 2014 who had more walks. I feel like it was Brantley. There we go. Doubles, Lindor. Doubles. Oh, we're doing pretty well. We're doing pretty well. We're doing pretty well. Oh, okay, never mind. Yeah, game over. You can copy your score, and this is what's pasted from the clipboard. And you can just paste that into any message, whatever. There you go. It's really simple. This data is coming from a CSV. I think it's a JSON actually. It's not pulling from an API. I thought about that, but I realized that it's all the same data anyway. It's static. It's nothing's changing. So I might as well just download it and make it a lot quicker. I wanted to play a bit with framer motion. So that's how I get these nice little animations here. Yeah, I'll just jump right into the code. Nice. Even though this is a simple project, I still want to structure out the video properly. So I'll first go through the code. I'll walk through the repo. It's a typical Next.js project, how I use Tailwind, but also how I use framer motion because that part was new for me. And then I'll talk a bit about how I got the data in. It is just a CSV, but I had to do some parsing, some manipulation that way. That might be helpful. And then talk a bit about the hydration errors that I got. And that occurs when there's differences between what's rendered on the server and on the client. And we are back in VS Code. If you notice, this is Next 13, so it is using the app router. I do see the benefit of it in some cases. I just couldn't fully utilize it in this project anyway, so I think I'll stay on the pages router for now. Anyway, this quiz, this game, it is just one page, and so that's in this page.js, and you can see there's a bunch of stuff commented out because I did start with TypeScript. Just got a bit annoying. I feel like I didn't really need type safety for a weekend project, so maybe we'll just save that for another day. Anyway, everything pretty much happens here. I import these two getPlayer, getQuestions services from utilities. Essentially, I call those before returning the function to get the questions that I want to show to the user, and then get the players. That corresponds to these questions and these players. All these players are coming from this getPlayers function, and all those questions, like in 2019, who had more hits, that's coming from this function here, getQuestions, and I'll go into a bit more detail about what that is. Other than that, it's fairly straightforward, just using a bunch of state variables to store how many strikes you have, your current score, the correct answer, that sort of thing. I'll talk a bit more about these two states here because this is very important for how the game works. This player state, it's an array of arrays, and each subarray has a pair of players. So that means for each question you see here, these two players are the first element of the players array. And when I click, who had more triples? Varsho. These next two players are the second element of that original players array. And so what's happening after I click a player, I'm slicing off the first element of the players array. So I'm slicing off a pair of players. And so then it's just reading the next two players. I'm doing the same thing with this stats array. And if we keep moving, I'll just go through the code a bit. This function to check the solution to see whether your selected player is the correct one. It's essentially an if-else statement that compares the respective stats for the players at hand. And then depending on whether you had the right or wrong answer, it just increments your score or keeps it the same, or it increments the strikes if you got something wrong. After you click click an answer, it kind of hangs there for a sec. And you can't click anything until it refreshes a couple of seconds later. And this is to let you see which answer is correct before moving on. So this is done over here by, after the score is checked, I set play status to false, and then I have this other update data function, which I call after 2 seconds, which basically takes the array of players and it just slices off the first pair because we've already done that. And then it sets the array again to that new shorter array. So in this question, you can see here, I have this stats.slice01. So that's what I mean by it's taking the first element from the stats array to form this question, which in this case, in 2022, who had more RBIs? So RBIs, that's a stat that was at the start of this stats array. The rest of this is just Tailwind and some conditional rendering. For example, here we are playing, so we want these are the solutions to be question marks. And then it's when you select it, then it reveals the answer. And finally, talking a bit about framer motion, because I thought this was cool. I wrapped the whole thing in this animate presence, and instead of using divs for these cards, made them motion divs. I could set things like them fading in, fading out, different scales for when you hover it, when you click on the card. So this is on hover, it's 1.05, and when you click it, it's 0.9. You can see there. This screen coming down, that is also framer motion. So that's this entire chunk up here when it's game over. That's a motion div for this screen that comes down from a Y position of -30, and it reaches a Y position of 0, and it comes down after 1 second, so a bit of a delay. You can see this pretty much everywhere. I used it for even this play again button, this nice little popping. So I found it quite powerful. I think I'll definitely use it again in future projects. Now that that's explained, we can talk about the data, which, like I said, it's not called by an API. All the player data is static. So I thought I might as well make my life easier and just use a CSV. But that's not all, because I realized I actually needed images, needed these guys to show up. I needed nice pictures. So I came up with a genius idea, okay, actually it wasn't that smart, of using Wikipedia images. So I wrote this script that essentially updates a given CSV with the relative or respective image from Wikipedia. So what's actually working here? Right, it uses the Open Graph protocol to grab the preview image of a certain player. This image right here is actually the Open Graph image, and I can show you that right here. There, perfect. And then I just had this other function where it takes in the CSV and it creates a new column with images, and then it just saves that new CSV. That's what this is doing. Anyway, the output here was an updated CSV with images as a column. Then I just converted that CSV to this JSON and imported that JSON in this player service utility. And in player service, I'm exporting that function get players that is called in page right here, get players, that returns the players, the array of players that we want. And this is a good opportunity to talk about the issues with hydration. Next.js makes use of server-side rendering, which is usually pretty helpful, but it sometimes causes these things called hydration errors. And I'm going to try to explain this to the best of my ability, but sometimes what's rendered on the server is not what shows up on the client, especially with things like random numbers. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. When I call get players, I'm returning a shuffled array because I don't want the players to show up in the same exact order, because then all the questions would be the same. The problem here is this shuffle function, I'm using math.random. So this is what Next.js does. It first renders some HTML on the server, then it pushes that HTML, and it's not interactive yet. Then after a split second, it becomes interactive because the JavaScript is served to the client as well. This is an issue when you have something random, for example, like math.random, because in this first step, I'm using math.random to create a players array. And that's what this HTML is pre-rendered with. Then that's given to the client, and then the JavaScript is given and it hydrates that HTML with a new math.random. And because math.random is random, or there's no seed being set, you end up with a different array of players. And so then the HTML doesn't match up with what it's supposed to. This HTML doesn't match up with this HTML. And so you get a hydration error. And you can get around this by using a pseudo-random generator. So make sure that the client and the server are using the same seed. And I tried that, but I ended up doing the laziest thing ever, which was to ignore the error by including this suppress hydration warning. Because everything I do is on the client side in terms of checking solutions and saving score and things like that, it doesn't matter if the original array that's rendered by the server is different from the array that's given to the client. It might flash for a sec. So you'll actually notice if I refresh this page that this question will flash, it'll update. It'll show a question, then it'll flash to update the question. But I realized that, yeah, because I'm checking the solution on the client side, I'm doing everything on the client side, I can afford to ignore that error and it'll work fine. Should you do that for something more important? Probably not. And there you have it. That's how I made this simple game pretty much all on the front end. It's not complex at all. So not like this is a super impressive project or anything, but it does give you an idea of what you can throw together quickly using a fairly accessible framework. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.